Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing as we remember Rotarian Dr. Rander Pollard, who passed away this month in peace. Dr. Pollard was a pioneering Black urologist, physician, entrepreneur, and philanthropist who was dedicated to the betterment of community. Dr. Pollard went into private practice in Milwaukee in 1958, becoming the first Black urologist in Wisconsin. The medical establishment that he encountered was far different than the one he left when he retired 38 years later, a credit to his efforts and others like him. A Rotary member for 40 years, Dr. Pollard will be missed. Please take a moment of silence for Dr. Pollard and his family. Please remain standing as Fred Birch, broker and manager at Bonnie Lake Real Estate LLC, will give our invocation.
Thank you, President Todd. The United Nations rose out of the ashes of World War II to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to promote fundamental human rights, to establish conditions for the respect of justice and international law, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Throughout the past 76 years, civil society organizations, including Rotary, have played a significant role in furthering the UN's objectives. For today's invocation, I offer excerpts from a prayer for the uniting of nations. Gracious Creator, your love embraces all members of the human family. Your care extends to the least of those among us. Walk alongside global stewards who work to create a more just and peaceful world. Equip the United Nations community with urgency and humility. Teach the world's leaders to forgive and to extend welcome across borders. Bless all efforts towards uniting people and nations. Amen.
Thank you, Fred. Everybody can be seated. We have a lot of guests here today with us, but before we get into recognizing our guests, I'd like to especially welcome and thank Joan Robertson, wife of the late Robbie Robertson, who was the president of our club in 1957 and 58. Joan and her family created the A.D. Robertson Fund for the United Nations in 2004 to advance the understanding of the work the United Nations does and the role Rotary has played with the United Nations since its founding. This is the 17th UN Day program that we have celebrated since the inception of the fund. Joan, who will celebrate her 106th birthday in January, is watching us from home. So welcome, Joan, and happy early birthday. Joan and Robbie's daughter, Annette Robertson, is here with her granddaughter, Carol Alexander Barnes, and her husband, Keith Barnes. And Annette would like to say a couple words.
This is very embarrassing for my daughter. I'd like to say thank you to all of the Rotarians here today, and my father, who passed away in '09, who was a past president. And I was teasing the past president today about joining the Flickering Candles. And my mother started a group called the Glowing Embers of some of the wives. I thought that would give you a chuckle. But anyway, she wanted to be here today, but she'll be watching us. And we're so happy to welcome Mike as our speaker in celebration of the 76th anniversary of the UN, its mission, and all that it has done worldwide. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the Robertson family for your support of Rotary and the United Nations as well.
So we do have a lot of guests here to recognize. When I call your name, please stand so you can be recognized. From the United Nations Association of Greater Milwaukee, we have Martha Collins, Jim Carpenter, Pam Richard, and Jack Murtaugh. And it looks like Steve Watrose as well. Also with us today, we have from Jacobs Engineering, Charles Winter and Sarah Patterath. We've got Girish Shaw from Logicalis. We've got Josh Neudorfer from Sigma Group and George Stone, a retired MATC professor. So welcome all our guests. Thank you for joining us today. So very shortly, we'll hear from Mike Paddock, our speaker, but first we've got some club business to take care of. The first is introducing new members. So please welcome Joanne Bruno to the stage.
Hello. I'd like to introduce you to Jody Lowe. Jody is the president and managing director of the Lowe Group, excuse me, which is a communications agency that provides public relations and marketing support to financial service organizations. Jody founded the firm in 2003, and since that time, she's built it to its staff size now of 9. Prior to that, she worked as the director of public relations and community relations for Strong Investments. In addition to serving as a board member for Waukesha State Bank, Jody has been involved in a variety of civic and community organizations, including the United Way, United Performing Arts Fund, the Wauwatosa Public Library Foundation, the Wisconsin Philharmonic Board, DSHA Marketing Committee, and the Milwaukee Press Club Board. I got to know Jody several years ago through her involvement with the Tempo Milwaukee. I was fortunate to work alongside her in her role as the chair of the Tempo Foundation Board, where I was continually impressed with her compassion, diplomacy, and tenacity as she shepherded that group through several new initiatives. Jody's married to Chris, her husband of 26 years, and they have 3 children. Ben, who's 26, Rachel is 24, and Luke is 15. She and her family have recently relocated downtown, where she has a whole new landscape to pursue her hobbies of running, hockey, that's watching, not playing, reading, and exploring libraries. Please join me in welcoming Jody to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee.
Thank you, Joanne. What a kind introduction. And when someone like Joanne gives you a call and said, maybe you should consider joining Rotary, I had to take it seriously. I'm a huge fan of Joanne and Mary McCormick and all the work that you all do. But the timing was good. Our recent move, my completion of my service at Tempo, I was looking for getting engaged in Milwaukee in a different way, and this is an opportunity to do that. I also called up my older brother and told him I was joining this Rotary. He is past president of the Waukesha Rotary, and he said, that is a great club. So I'm proud to be a new member, and thank you for your kind welcome.
So the real reason I'm here today is to confess to you that I am here as an example of a bad Rotarian. Excuse me. Before moving to Milwaukee in 2007, I was a member of a Rotary Club in a small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for almost 20 years, where recruiting new members to the club was almost a weekly event for me. I was pretty surprised this spring, and not in a positive way, when I realized that I've been a member of this club for 14 years. And during that time, I have not put forward one name for a new member. I was pretty embarrassed by that. I think it was really easy for me coming into a club this size to look around and think, you all can do the particular heavy lifting on that. You'll be happy to know I've since changed my evil ways. I've made a personal commitment to recruiting several new members to this club this year. And I hope that if any of you find yourself on that path that I was on, that you might consider doing the same. The office makes it very easy to do. If you know someone who might be a good Rotarian, simply invite them to a Tuesday meeting. The first meal is on the club, and the office can provide you with general information that makes it very easy. So take it from me, it's not too late to change your evil ways. Jody, you're my first recruit, but I promise you will not be my last.
Thank you, Joanne. And Jody, welcome to our club. We're happy to have you. Sunday, October 24th was World Polio Day, a day when global health experts share our progress on the road toward polio eradication. And, the hope is that polio will be the second disease eradicated after smallpox. You will recall that each spring our club asks you to support the End Polio Now initiative. This year we raised over $24,000 thanks to a generous match by the Zilber Family Foundation. Over the past decade, our club has raised $185,000 to aid the effort to eradicate polio, which is now only endemic in Pakistan and Afghanistan. In honor of World Polio Day, our club will donate an additional $1,000 to the polio campaign. If you would like to donate to World Polio Day with us, there will be a donation link in the email that gets sent out to all members after this program. So in that email, you'll also find more information about World Polio Day if you're interested. The pandemic has only increased the need to supply food for those who are less fortunate and face hunger. Please join the Done in a Day committee on Saturday, November 6th, to help with the enormous task Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin faces in trying to meet the needs of our community. Volunteers are needed to sort and package food at their Lindsay Heights location from 9 a.m. until noon. Children 10 or older are encouraged to attend and welcome, but must be accompanied by a parent or guardian. A sign-up can be found outside the auditorium here on the Rotary table, as well as a sign-up board, right next to it. So if you can make it and are interested, please sign up. Lastly, next week being the first Tuesday of the month will be our monthly breakfast meeting. So please don't forget that it is breakfast, not lunch, November 2nd. We're looking forward to a great program with Leon Todd, Executive Director of the Fire and Police Commission. So it will be a great program, I can guarantee that. I cannot guarantee that Jamie Reed will be bringing any more bacon, but please join us and please mark your calendars for breakfast Tuesday, November 2nd. And finally, Jerry Stepaniak, President of Stepaniak Associates Consulting LLC, has an update regarding our next Thai Rotarian tour, and we'll also introduce our speaker, Mike Paddock.
Thank you, President Todd. First, Thai Rotarian. We have scheduled a Thai Rotarian at the Marathon Machines Company. Many of you may remember, I'm thinking this was 5-6 weeks ago, Glenn Reed, the owner and president of Marathon Machines, was here to talk with us. And Glenn is an interesting, sort of out-of-the-box kind of guy. He has the credibility that comes from starting Adobe Systems and inventing iMovies and a few other things in the Apple world. And now he's turning his attention to an interesting, very staple product, a washing machine that he wants to convert into a washer and dryer and use Wisconsin-made machineries. They're actually Speed Queen machines that are made, I think, up in Ripon. And is going to double the functionality, add a smart screen to it, and I don't know what else. He didn't talk much about that when he was here. He was really talking about his philosophies and his style. So if you'd like to hear more about what he's actually up to here in Wisconsin with Marathon Machines, you'll have an opportunity to do so on November 17th from 4 to 5:30, or 4 until we end, really. The location is very easy to get to. It's in the Menominee Valley at 1825 West St. Paul, which for those of you who need a way of finding that, it is across the street from Sobelman's. So, and for those of you who will admit to having one of those Bloody Marys with the chicken on top, this is the place right across the street, quite literally. And we'll have a chance to interact with not only Glenn, but his engineering staff and whatever. You have a flyer on your table, and I just call your attention to the first line up on top. please join us for a tour that will change the way you think about manufacturing in Milwaukee. I didn't write that, they wrote that. So I think that's going to be pretty fascinating, actually. So please join us. Sign up on the desk or sign up online, but please sign up. Spouses and the significant others or even kids are also welcome. Now, let me turn my attention to a very wonderful task. My good friend, Mike Paddock, for whom I have the most enormous respect, will be here to share a bit of his experience in life. Mike is a proud member of our club, the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. He's a Paul Harris Fellow. He's a major donor to the club. Educationally, he has graduated with degrees from in both engineering and surveying, and has professional credentials in those areas. The degrees from Michigan Tech University. He's had an unbelievable career on the front end, which is when he worked for CH2M Hill and was one of the key people involved in projects we will all recognize. And I picked a line out of his resume. He did major multi-billion, multi-firm, multi-contract projects. Things like the Marquette Interchange, the Mitchell Interchange in the 94 work all the way down to the state line, or the Zoo Interchange. So we're talking, a minimum of 800 million and as many as 120 contractors on just one of those projects. I always thought when the Marquette was going on that somebody was probably sitting in a trailer somewhere and had a project management spreadsheet that was like 9,000 lines down and about, maybe about 1,000 lines across. I later discovered it was Mike Paddock who was that guy. It's really incredible. After that, he actually became the chief engineer for EWB USA and has done over 70 projects in 5 different continents. If you think of a disaster, Hurricanes Dorian, Idia, Maria, Agatha, Stan, he was one of those guys that got called every single time and was on site helping organize the recovery for those things. Same thing with Volcano Fuego down in the area we know, Guatemala, or even the drought in Ethiopia. He's published numerous professional articles, received 15 awards, and I'm not going to bore you with them, but they're everything from engineering to humanitarian awards. He's written 2 books, one called Bridging Barriers and another that just released called Global Inspirations. Mike had an interesting interaction with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And as he said, he unexpectedly survived. And after that, Mike and his wife, Kathy, basically set out on figuring out how they could use Mike's engineering skills to basically better the world. I'd say he's doing pretty good, pretty darn good. Currently, Mike is a senior technical advisor at the United Nations Development Program in the Crisis Bureau, and I would like you to give a robust Rotary welcome for our own Mike Paddock.
Well, thank you, Jerry. You must have talked to my mom. And I think maybe half of that was even true. So what a pleasure to be here today, talk about the United Nations as we celebrate 76 years of the UN. And the UN and Rotary have had a long and symbiotic relationship from the very, very beginning. First, I want to acknowledge the incredible work that this club is doing internationally. Through Jerry's leadership at the World Community Service Committee, all the projects you see on the slide, those were all done in this last year. Whoa, they've been very, very busy. very active, working on an international basis. And of course, don't forget that last one, Polio Plus. We're this close, right? You know, as part of the Crisis Bureau, as Jerry said, I respond to a lot of crises, and there's been no lack of work this last year for sure. And wherever I go, I run into Rotarians. It's amazing to me. The Rotarians are always the first to respond. They're local, they have boots on the ground, they have beds in the ground, as I like to say. And they are an invaluable asset for us at the UN as we organize our response to any disaster. I've run into them in Guyana, which is the center picture, Honduras on the right. We've got Bahamas on the lower right, Mozambique on the lower left. All of those Rotarians were at the table helping us plan those responses. But the one that I wanted to really highlight is the one that's in yellow, which is the PPE work that we did in Guatemala. You see, the Rotarians in Guatemala had the connections to local businesses that worked on what I would say adjacent businesses to PPE. They made garments, they made plastics, but they didn't make medical grade equipment. And it was so in dire need in that country as well as around the globe. And so we could marry up that manufacturing expertise that they had there through the connections with Rotary in Guatemala with the biomedical engineers here at our own Marquette University and University of Wisconsin-Madison and develop PPE. But the thing that I was most proud of is the work that they did to repair ventilators. You see, many ventilators in the country were broken and couldn't be repaired. And it wasn't because they didn't want to or lacked the knowledge. The supply chain was broken. The ventilators were old. They were out of date. The parts were discontinued, so they couldn't get access to parts to do those repairs. So through this program, we were able to find alternate parts, develop adapters, 3D printing that could be used to make that connection, send those designs down to the university in Guatemala, have them print them, and we got 52 ventilators back into service. Just think about how many lives have been saved with those 52 ventilators over the last 18 months, right? Amazing. Now that's how I kind of got connected back to the UN, because that program, that Rotary program that started right here in Milwaukee, it got noticed by the UN and they came and said, hey, can you help us replicate that around the globe? Wow, right? That's impact. That's what Rotary does. So we were able to do that in over a dozen countries around the planet, replicating that same playbook, as we called it, that was developed right here in the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. You should be really, really proud of that. So let's talk a little bit about the UN. So the UN serves as a global forum where countries raise and discuss the most difficult issues. A couple of key things. The UN doesn't have any power, right? The only power they have is convening the world together and be able to reach some sort of agreement. It's not like they have authority. It was really formed as a way for countries to get together, discuss, yell at each other, famously pound their shoe on the table, right? Instead of shooting bullets at each other. That was the purpose of the UN. And Rotary has been there from the beginning. Believe it or not, that book that's shown there, that was written during World War II by Rotary, encouraging some sort of form of a United Nations to be developed. So we were not only there when the United Nations got formed, we were advocating for the start of the UN. That is really, really important. So now I'm going to show a quick video. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, but for me as a Rotarian, it warms my heart every time I see it. So hopefully you enjoy this short 3-minute video.
"1944. Around the globe, nations stared in horror at the devastation of a Second World War. But even as the battles raged, global leaders planned for a new era and a post-war organization for peace. Rotary International, long committed to global cooperation and peace, had been raising awareness of a united nations, publishing articles and pamphlets to encourage the discussion. Finally, in June of 1945, the eyes of the world were on San Francisco as delegates from 50 countries gathered to sign the UN Charter.
The Conference of the United Nations on International Organization is now convened.
Even as they gathered, delegates read the headlines proclaiming the end of the war in Europe. At the invitation of the U.S. Secretary of State, Rotary International sent 11 Rotarians to serve as consultants to the delegation from the United States. These included 2 past Rotary presidents, Alan Albert and Tom Davis. In fact, there were Rotarians and honorary members from around the globe, some as official delegates for their nations and others as consultants. Ezequiel Padilla served as chair of the delegation from Mexico. Rotarian Carlos Romulo represented the Philippines and would later serve as president of the 4th session of the UN General Assembly.
The Charter of the United Nations is a solid structure upon which we can build for a better world. History will honor you forever.
There was a triumphant ceremony as representatives signed the charter for their nations. Joseph Salem from Lebanon was just one of the Rotarians who signed the charter on behalf of their countries. U.S. Secretary of State E.R. Stettinius was a signatory for the United States. He later described the invitation to Rotary International as a recognition of the practical part Rotary's members have played and will continue to play in the development of understanding among nations. Rotary's participation in the UN Charter Conference was just the beginning of a humanitarian-focused collaboration that continues. Today, with a vision they have shared since the beginning, the United Nations and Rotary serve as examples of global cooperation as they lead efforts to promote peace, development, and world health.
So I don't know about you, but that's a pretty moving video, right? I agree. Very well done. So there's 3 objectives that the UN has. First and foremost, it's peace and security. It's still about 60% of our budget is responding to security and peace situations. And I know that there's been a lot of criticisms over the years about our peacekeepers, but Tufts University just recently published a report that showed that in 70% of the deployments, we were able to minimize and lower the escalation of the violence. I wish it was more, but 70% is worthwhile. Human rights. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt championed that from the day one. And it's something that's still a cornerstone, a pillar of our work at the UN. And finally, economic development and humanitarian assistance, something that's near and dear to my heart. And that's the alphabet soup, as I call it. All of us, UNDP, UNHCR, WHO, all working together as one UN towards those common goals. And let's talk about the goals. You know, one of the most amazing achievements happened in 2000 when the world got together and came to agree on 8 common Millennium Development Goals. It was signed on by 189 countries. It's the first time anything like that had even been conceived. And most people didn't think that there was a chance that we would get the majority of the countries to sign on. Now play it forward. In 2015, we expanded that to 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs as we call it. And it's been adopted by 193 countries. And that's kind of our mission and vision, our bellwether, if you will, on what we're trying to achieve as a planet. So we're going to have a little fun. We're going to have a quiz. Now, John Hine, I know I promised no quizzes, but I lied. Pop quiz. 4 questions. So the first question, in 1990, 58% of the world's population lived in low-income countries. What is the share today? How many people think 61%? Okay. How many 37%? And how many 9%? Okay. Second question. What share of the world's population don't have enough food to eat? This is basically food security, right? And this is the world. Around 37%? How many? How about around 23%? And 11%? Okay? Halfway home, guys. Third question. In low-income countries, and you know in the UN we kind of group countries. We have low-income countries, middle-income countries, and then we have the rest of the world. So just low-income countries, what share of girls complete elementary school? Basically go to school through age 11. So how many think 20%? How about 40%? How about 60%? Okay? Last question. Put this one in because of all the great water work that the club is doing. How many people in the world have access to safe drinking water at their home or close by? So this is the whole world now again. So around 30%? 50%? How about 70%? All right. Let's see how we did. I think the winner should get like an extra cookie, right? Should get something, right? All right. So, first question. Believe it or not, it's 9%. Now I can see, Jerry, you're saying, Mr. Paddock, I question your data. But the reality is that since 1990, the biggest change has been China and India has moved up the economic ladder and moved out of a low-income country. Tremendous progress. Second question, food security. Believe it or not, 11%. Now your answers, the second and third answers, they were correct 20 or 30 years ago. That's the amount of progress that we have made in the last couple of decades. You may not believe that, I guess, based upon all the bad news you see in the media, right? Third question, low-income countries, girls going through elementary school? Yeah, believe it or not, 60%. 60% and tremendous progress has been made in that area in the last couple of decades as well. And last but not least, water, 70% have access to water at their home or nearby. So I tell you this because it's not just goals that we set, it's actually achievement. And the goals that we do set are achievable if we just work together. We've made tremendous progress, and we can achieve the goals that we set. They're not just pie-in-the-sky aspirations. They're things that can actually be achieved if we work together. And I wanted to put in a couple of other examples. One of my favorite websites is called Gapminder, and it takes the data from all the sites that you have from the United Nations, and it puts it in very easy to use and visual context. And in this particular graph, you can see one of the countries, Guatemala, how has life expectancy changed from 1980 up until 2020. And you can see that we've moved from 55 all the way up to 72 in Guatemala. Hey, that's good news from grandma, right? That's a lot of progress. Sticking in Guatemala, this one is a little bit tougher to read. For you engineers, the scale on the left is log scale. So in general, what this is showing that with child mortality, in the last 20 years, just 20 years, we took the child mortality rate and cut it in half in Guatemala. Cut it in half. Now, I wish it was 0, but still, that's a marked improvement towards those goals. One more that I wanted to show, and this is education. This is kind of interesting. Look at what happened in, again, Guatemala. We went from 40% going to school all the way up to 80%, and then we hit a plateau. And this is exactly why we're concerned about COVID-19. Because when we hit the Great Recession in countries like Guatemala, we were held back on that trajectory that we were achieving to accomplish our bigger goals. You know, folks, I remember the day back in March when my boss, the Secretary General, SG, came on and he said that we would have more deaths in the second year of the pandemic than the first. Let that sink in for a second. Whoa. I was like, it can't be. We've gone through too much in this first year. There's no way we can do more. Sadly, he was right. Look at the graph. The red line is at the end of the first year, and you can see the trajectory we're on. There's no bending the curve. We continue to lose lives every day. Now, things are looking better for us in the global north, but in the global south, things are still pretty grim. Vaccination rates in Africa are still around 5% or less. The thing I wanted to also mention is that it's more than the numbers, right? I mean, yeah, it's the impact on families and friends. But the thing that really shocks me is that the people that we have lost all over the globe are our senior people. They're our leaders, our mentors, our wisdom. That's the thing that's so hard to replace. And the impacts will be felt by us for a long time to come. The economic impacts are significant. And I remember when I read this book, The End of Epidemics. I read it 2 years before COVID. And it struck me because it talks so much about the impact on the economy. And I'm like, wait a second, it's all about death and destruction. What are we talking about the economy so much? And now I know why. Because it's the economy that really has a big impact long term in a post-epidemic situation. You know, the number of people that will be pushed down the economic ladder exceeds the number of people in the United States. Over 300 million people will be forced down the economic ladder into extreme poverty. We were making such good progress, and now we've reversed. Many countries don't have the same resilience that we have here. People don't get a check for $1,000, right? Plus, they have very vulnerable healthcare systems. In Central America, I remember when I was down there in the last trip, and they were in a major surge. They had a curfew, and when they locked down because of that vulnerability of their healthcare system. So you couldn't even drive. If you were in a car, you got arrested. And so they ran stories on the radio asking people to eat one meal a day. Conserve your food. Absolutely mind-boggling. And the signal was, if you didn't have enough food, to hang a sheet on your window and wave a white flag maybe as a signal to your friend, your neighbor, your family member to give you a sandwich. That's the reality of the economic situation around much of the planet. That's why our friends at the World Food Program are so concerned. Now, what about peace? Guess what? Everybody on the planet is crabby. It's not just here in the United States. People are losing confidence in their governments, in their leadership, in their local government, in their families, in their God. And this is causing distress. You know, just yesterday we had the event in Sudan. Those events are coming at us faster and faster. And at the UN, we're very, very concerned about the instability of the planet because of COVID. It's the stress that it's putting on us that's cracking a lot of our institutions. And we're doing our best to try to hold it together, but that's going to be, maybe, in my opinion, the biggest challenge for us in the next year is peace. And I will tell you this, that I think us in the United States don't really know the value of peace like much of the world. You know, we haven't had a lot of conflict on our soils for many, many years. And there's nothing like war to tear a country apart. So some people are questioning, is the United Nations up for the challenge? Is the world up for the challenge? It's a fair question. The institutions that we built were not built for this. The one thing that I've learned is everybody's in agreement that the UN needs to be reformed. But that's where the agreement ends. Half the people say the UN needs to have more influence. The other half say it needs to have less influence. How do we come together as a planet and apply the lessons learned from the pandemic going forward? The Secretary General has called for such a commission to be convened so that we can put into place our lessons learned to build a better UN going forward. You know, Jerry had a good statement for me earlier today. He says, you know, when things crack like that, sometimes when the egg cracks, the chicken that comes out is even better, right? And that's my hope and prayer for the UN as well. So I'm going to stop right here because I wanted to make sure I had enough time for questions. I've got more things to talk about, but I want to hear from you. So if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A if you're watching on the screen, or you can just raise your hand and I'll call on you. So anybody have a question? John, how did you do on the quiz? You know what? Don't feel bad, my friend, because I will tell you that in that quiz that has been given to world leaders as well as leadership at the UN, they had a hard time beating the monkey. In other words, random guessing. So it's a lot of us are still working with the mindset of the way the world was a decade or 2 decades ago. So don't feel bad. Questions? Yes? Unfortunately, after 20 years, trillions of dollars, development in Afghanistan is still a very poor country. It's my understanding that unfortunately Washington is now interfering with some of the Afghan assets, not allowing humanitarian aid to go to Afghanistan on some of the money that was promised. Does the UNDP have any input into this conversation about it so that humanitarian aid can flow and so Afghanistan can go about its business? Great question. Question, just to repeat it, is about Afghanistan and how, in general, how can assets flow there to help the people of Afghanistan? And I will just point out, I mean, there's 32 million people in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is in a very vulnerable situation. The bulk of their GDP was based upon the war, frankly. And also, they're in the middle of a big drought right now. So there's a lot of people looking for a sandwich in Afghanistan. The Secretary General has told us at the UN that we need to stand and deliver the program. So our staff are still in Kabul with the mission of delivering the program. My boss at the Crisis Bureau is actually the one that's been assigned that little problem in Afghanistan. I don't envy his position. And I'll tell you why, and this is just my perspective. The issue is that there's all of this need, but at the same time, there's some core values that are not consistent with what we have at the UN. Probably most notably, women. How women are treated, how women are in leadership. You can imagine in our office, most of the people that work there are Afghani. We've got thousands of them. Many of them have been there for decades. Some of our best leaders are women. And now the Taliban is asking them to step down and not come to work. That's a big blow. So we're wrestling with the fact, all the need that's there, but also what is our core values. The tough decisions, right, are when the Taliban wants us to take the money that was allocated towards, for example, women empowerment programs and shift it over to something else. We've got a little bit of a problem with that, and we need to have a discussion about it. I'm confident that my boss, who's probably about the best there is out there in negotiating and diplomacy, will be able to come up with some resolution that's going to still be able to provide the help that the people in Afghanistan need, because they are so vulnerable. But at the same time, there are some core values that the UN needs to respect. So it's really a tough one, really a tough one. Next question, yeah.
Guatemala a couple of years ago, pre-COVID. The State Department was warning about going to many areas of Guatemala. There's various times that government was corruption gangs there. I believe Marquette has that engineers without borders that you work with. How do you continue to work under serious conditions of crime and danger for people involved?
So the question is how do you continue to work in places that are maybe difficult to work because of security issues? Did I get that about right? So there's different levels of security concern. Certainly in Guatemala, there maybe are some places in Guatemala City that I would stay away from. I think I would probably say the same thing about New York and Chicago too. But anyway, the programs at Engineers Without Borders, and yes, I've been involved with not only Marquette, but MSOE, UWM, all have chapters and are doing amazing work. That balances that risk versus need. In places like Guatemala, they can function quite well. The place that's tough for me right now is Haiti. You know, right now, unfortunately, Haiti's on my list of projects to work on. So in Haiti, it's really hard to move because we really don't have much of a government to work with, and the security situation is dire. There's really very little police. There's very little army presence there, and so it makes it very difficult to move. And in those situations, the UN has kind of two different modes. One they call a national implementation model, where we work through the government, basically work with that local government to provide the services, providing the appropriate oversight to meet our grand bargain that we have with the world to provide unbiased opinions as well as oversight so those dollars are being spent correctly. The other way is what we call a direct implementation model, which is where our donors and ourselves don't have the same confidence in the local government to be able to do that. But we cannot ignore the need, right? So those are the things that we're struggling with in Haiti, but it's there the security situation is pretty difficult. Yes.
Human rights initiatives for decades were always thwarted because of vetoes from the Soviet Union, later Russia, or China. In order for the United Nations to get stuff done, it needs to correct that imbalance, that veto power from anti-progress. How do you think we can reform it?
Yeah, so to repeat the question, I'll do my best, sir, is how can the United Nations be reformed and rethought to deal with the current political state of affairs, which are not the same as maybe they were even a few years ago or at least a few decades ago. And he points out that one of the challenges with the League of Nations, which was the predecessor of the UN, right, was that they were unable to deal with some of the fascisms that were taking place around the globe and resulted in World War II, right? So I think I would suspect that maybe you're on the side of the UN needs to have more authority and not so much with the Security Council members. And of course, there's some that would disagree with that, and rightfully so. The challenge is going to be able to get the globe to come together and agree. And when I would think about that, I would say that's impossible. There's no way, right, for people to give up power so that the globe can maybe be in a better position for peace. But I'm buoyed by the fact that we've done it before. You know, we did it after World War II. We've done it with the Sustainable Development Goals. We did it with the Millennium Development Goals. So, and it's just too darn important to give up on. So we have to try. And that's why I'm so proud of the Secretary General's movement to ask the nations to come together and reformulate itself, right? We can talk about maybe what we should have done better or could have done better, but I think it's going to be important to look to the future and what do we need to look like as a UN so that we can function and be more effective post-pandemic. Because in the post-pandemic economic recovery, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity as well as challenge, right? And so shame on us if we don't do everything we can to take advantage of that opportunity. But thank you for that question. And I'm glad that I am not the Secretary General. I'll just put that on record. Yes. Yeah, I think it's fair to say this is my opinion, right? Not the official UN opinion. Oh, I'm sorry. The opinion is where does the United States stand as far as its influence, particularly with human rights? Did I get that? Okay. So, in my opinion, it's diminished. There's no doubt about it, right? We've had when our ability to be that beacon on the hill is probably diminished and tarnished, especially when we look at Afghanistan, going and looking for weapons of mass destruction, and there weren't any. Black Lives Matter. The list goes on and on. We're not perfect either, right? But I will say this, that the world still looks to the United States for leadership. It begs for leadership. And we're in a position where we can be that leader. So have there been some mistakes? Are we perfect? No. And yes, there's been mistakes. But I don't think that means we can't still be a leader in the nation, on the globe, for the core values that we believe in as Americans. So that's just my opinion. Yes, sir. The difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals is the fact that the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, people signed, all the countries signed that. The ingredient that makes it different is the fact that Sustainable Development Goals apply to every country. In other words, those goals apply to how we live and act in our own country as well. We talk about healthcare globally, we need to talk about healthcare locally. Yeah, so the point is that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are really intended to apply to the whole globe, not just those other guys, and that it also applies to us here. And there's some pretty interesting goals in there, particularly renewable energy, healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. But I think the thing that's pretty cool about them is 193 countries agreed to it, right? You know, and who would have thought that would have been even possible, right? So that's what gives me confidence that we can move forward and build back better, come out of this and take of the COVID and be able to take advantage of it. I think we've got time for one more question. Yes. Yeah, so the question is what is the UN doing on climate change and what can it do? I think is the question. Is that fair? Yeah, I mean, the August report was pretty daunting, right? And those that are you that are climate change enthusiasts will know that right now we have the COP26, right? So in Glasgow, we're meeting to talk about setting new goals for climate change as a planet, because guess what? It's not just, what we do or what China does or what some other country does affects the whole globe, right? So we need to work on it together. And so I'm buoyed by the fact that we're willing to take on that task at the same time as COVID and these other things, right? It shows that I guess maybe the UN can walk and chew gum at the same time. So climate change is important, and I'll share with you just one story. I responded to the crisis, the hurricane in Dorian in the Bahamas. And that really shook me because there was a wave of water. The tidal surge was 24 feet. And then I realized on Grand Bahama, the highest elevation is less than 24 feet. So what do you do with rising sea level when you don't have any place to go? I mean, is the answer that you go and invade Georgia? I mean, I don't know what you do when it's a nation like that, right? So you're exactly right. It's going to be one of the big challenges we have with what we call displaced persons. So internally displaced persons as well as international refugees. Climate change is front and center about our concern on that because it ripples through so many things. I'd love to talk more about that. John, I'll get your question after this, but I'm out of time. Todd's going to... So John's asking if the Taliban has approved the Polio Plus program in Afghanistan. I don't know if that's the case for sure, John. And I will also just add that we're still trying to figure out who really is in charge there and who can approve what. So, but God willing that will be the case because that's one of our last two countries, right? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mike. Thank you not only for your service to the United Nations and the World Community Service group here, but thanks for your comments and insights about the United Nations and the role that Rotary has played throughout the life of the United Nations. In honors of leaders like you who come to speak to our club, we will make a donation to the YWCA of Southeastern Wisconsin, whose mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. I also have for you one of these wonderful Rotary Connecting mugs, so I'll bring that down after this. Couple last reminders. The last book discussion for the Some of Us takes place this Thursday at 4 p.m. over Zoom. Keep an eye out for that Zoom link if you have signed up. The Afghan Refugee Committee will meet immediately after this in the Rotary office, just around the corner here. And then final reminder, join us next week for breakfast. Not lunch. Executive Director of the Fire and Police Commission, Leon Todd, will join us. So, again, don't show up looking for Rotary next week at noon. With that being said, let's go out and do some good in the world. This meeting is adjourned.